which precedes the appointment of a judicial committee need not be done by two elders, but can in Australia be done by a woman acting on their behalf. Would that be something that would be open to the Australia Committee to follow or to adopt?
Mr. Stewart, I certainly would hope that the Australia Branch Committee would get back to the Service Committee with the reasons why that's needed, and then eventually I would hope that would get to the governing body so that we could approve whatever changes are needed worldwide.
But it may be that the Branch Committee in Australia has a different view on these matters than the Branch Committee in some other country. We'll take one close to home, New Zealand, for example. Well, that may, let me do one further afield anywhere, if you like. The Philippines may take a different view. Is there space for the branch committees to have different investigative procedures in different parts of the world?
To answer your question, the answer is yes, that is possible. But if the reason for doing so is to avoid trauma, then that's something the governing body is interested in. We want to see how we can encourage all the countries to avoid that. But if it's a matter of technicality that they need to do it a certain way, then yes, we would expect they would at least notify us, and there could be differences.
Mr. Jackson, is there any biblical impediment to a woman being appointed to investigate an allegation?
There is no biblical impediment to a woman being involved with the investigation. In fact, I think... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Your Honour.
No, you continue.
And I think that's one of the benefits of the Royal Commission, as what has been brought to light, is that certainly it is good for a woman to be involved, with particularly some of these sensitive areas. But if I could just mention, many of our publications are very broad in aspect. We're not just talking about this one aspect of child abuse, which is a horrific crime, but it can also, the same principles are used for other sins such as drunkenness and other things the Bible mentions. But in this sensitive area, yes, I think the Commission has clearly shown that it would be good for women to be involved.
Is there any biblical impediment to a determination, a judicial determination, being made by a body which includes women, although the elders thereafter may respond in terms of the as the decision maker in relation to what happens to someone after a decision has been made as to the truth or not of an allegation?
That's a good question. Could I just mention first, Your Honour, something, please bear with me on this. The judicial system that Jehovah's Witnesses use is not in competition with the criminal justice system. We respect that, and we feel that that's something that the community needs to make use of. But also, if I can just highlight, any victim is not viewed as someone that needs to stand before a judicial committee. They did not do anything wrong. They're the ones that have been victimised. They need the help. Now, to answer your question directly, women can be involved in this very sensitive area, but biblically speaking, the role of judges in the congregation, it lays with men. That's what the Bible says, and that's what we endeavour to follow.
Can you give me the reference for that?
Yes. In the scriptures,
that is judges being only men. Not elders, but judges being only men.
Okay, I would have to check it. I think Deuteronomy is one of them, but with regard to 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm sure Your Honour, you're very familiar with this. In verse 1, the statement is trustworthy. If a man is reaching out to be an overseer, he is desirous of a fine work. The overseer should therefore be irreprehensible, a husband of one wife, moderate in habits, sound in mind, orderly, hospitable, qualified to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but reasonable, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. a man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, having his children in subjection with all seriousness. In biblical times, the same expression that is used for elder is also used for older man. And when we're translating, of course, that is my field, sometimes it is hard to decide whether it means elder as in a position or older man. But definitely when it speaks of judges at the gates in Israel, we're talking about older men. But I apologize, Your Honour, seeing that you asked this question, I cannot give you the exact scriptural reference, but we'll be happy to do that.
We would appreciate it, because one possible modification to meet this issue of the lack of women as judges of allegations brought forward by women against men may be a modification of your process to include women in the judicial determination step. You understand?
I do understand, Your Honour, and we will make sure you get those references.
And can you understand how a woman, a young woman, any woman might feel when allegations which she makes of having been sexually assaulted by a male are determined exclusively by men?
In the context of a police station, I can understand that, Your Honour, but please, may I also mention, the role of these elders, they are friends of those in the congregation. Their role is to shepherd, help, care for. And so although perhaps a young person may feel that way, and we would do everything we can within the Bible parameters to make sure that that is eased so that a person isn't put in that very difficult situation. But still, ultimately, the decision, maybe without that person, would be made. And the decision is not concerning the criminality. That is the criminal system. The decision is concerning the spiritual cleanliness of our congregation and the rehabilitation of those that commit sins.
That's to concentrate on the abuser. But what I'm talking about is the position of the person who's been abused. Do you understand?
I do understand that.
So all that you've just said is talking about it from only one perspective, you see?
Mm-hmm. So from the other perspective, with a victim, the main thing for us is helping, supporting, and guiding, and women will be involved with that. You see, the Judicial Committee is not judging the victim. The elders in the congregation and the women in the congregation have the obligation to give full support to any victim.
Well, that may be so, but the point I was seeking to have you address was, can you understand how a woman might feel when allegations which she brings forward against a man in the congregation are considered and judged entirely by men?
Obviously I'm not a woman, so I wouldn't like to speak on their behalf, but the two of us, I'm sure, could understand from what has been expressed and believe that perhaps there would be a hesitancy there.
And can I add this to the question, because it's one of the factual circumstances we face in this hearing. Can you understand the circumstance for a woman who brings an allegation against an elder, who is a friend of the others, who must judge the truth or otherwise of the allegation? Can you understand how that person must feel?
I can try to understand it, Your Honour, yes. But again, could I ask, and again, this is not my field of activity, but as far as I understand, we have a process in place whereby a neutral member, like a circuit overseer, will be involved with such a sensitive case.
It would be the case, would it not, that even a circuit overseer is going to know an elder well?
They should be familiar, but they also know the victim well. You see, it's not taking into consideration the spiritual responsibility. You see, these elders are not paid to do their job. They do it because of love and concern and wanting to shepherd the flock. And so I think what we're missing is the spiritual element to this whole thing, where people are comfortable talking to one another.
Well, I don't know whether you heard the evidence of the survivors here. Did you hear that evidence?
No, unfortunately, that was a bad time for me caring for my father. I apologise, but I will look forward to hearing a summary of it.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, because, Mr. Jackson, for example, the elders who hear these allegations, one of the things they have to do is to measure the credibility of the person who says that she suffered abuse. Is that not right?
Yes, as a prosecutor would also measure the evidence that he does before he goes to a case.
Well, not so much the prosecutor. Perhaps you're thinking of the judge.
Sorry, no. If I understand correct, well, I'm going way out of my field because I'm not a lawyer, but I thought any case that would go to the police and then brought to the prosecution, you'd have to at least establish there was some validity.
Yes,
maybe that's not the case in Australia.
Well, the point is this, Mr. Jackson, isn't it, that you've appreciated, I think, that an elderly man may be in a difficult position to understand just how a young woman, for example, making an accusation or an allegation of child sexual abuse feels in having to make that allegation.
That is true, but at the same time, perhaps someone who's never experienced the trauma that these victims have felt, even a woman may find that very hard as well, because it's such a personal experience.
But you'll accept, I'm sure, that in many instances where a woman or young woman makes such an allegation, she would feel a lot more comfortable having to make the allegation and explain the circumstances to another woman.
I can't say that I would give a comment on that, Mr. Stewart, because you see, again, it takes away the consideration of the relationships in our congregations. It's not like your churches where people just go to church and don't talk to one another. Their congregations do become familiar, and there can be a friendship. So I agree that the point you're trying to get at, we need to know what the victim is comfortable in doing with regard to who they speak to.
Well, you gave us a scripture, 1 Timothy 3 verse 1, which, as I understood it, was the authority for the principle that, as it's put there, an overseer, but in, I think, modern language, an elder, must be a man. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is there a scriptural reference, and perhaps this is the one you said you'd need to come back to us on, is there a scriptural reference which says that the investigation of allegations of serious misconduct must be done by an elder?
If I could just clarify your question a little, Mr. Stewart. You see, what I think you've heard in the Commission is that we have said that women can be involved in all these various aspects leading up to the actual decision-making, whether or not someone is spiritually qualified to remain in the congregation. So just that one aspect, the actual judicial committee itself, is where we believe that men would be involved.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's the question I was putting to you, you see. I was wondering whether you could have a structure which meant that the judicial decision as to whether or not the allegation was true could be determined by a body capable of having women represented on it, and that body's decision would then be taken to the elders in relation to decisions to disfellowship. Do you understand?
I understand that, Your Honour.
Well, is it possible to make that change?
It is possible to make sure that elders are fully aware of the whole story. But for women to be elders in the congregation, that is not possible.
No, Mr. Jackson, I wasn't asking you that. I was asking you to consider whether the process may involve a determination which we outside the church would call a judicial determination. That is the allegation true or false? And then that decision having been made, the elders would then make a decision as to the consequence, being disfellowship or otherwise. Do you understand?
I do understand.
Could women be involved in the determination of whether or not the allegation is true?
Well, Your Honour, if I could say, I think they already are involved.
Not in the decision, in the decision, Mr. Jackson. Please address my question.
Okay. Yes, well, please, could I just use an example? If an underage child it says that something has happened and then two women are involved with helping that person, surely they have to decide whether or not the facts are true and present those to the elders. Otherwise, how would the elders know what the facts are?
Mr. Jackson, you're not dealing with my question.
I'm sorry, I apologise.
Would you like me to put it again? Would you like me to put it again?
If you would, please.
Your process at the moment has a judicial determination which is made by the elders. And that's the point at which a decision is made as to whether the allegation is true or false. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is it possible for the process to be modified so that that decision can be made by a body which could include women? That is, the decision as to whether or not the allegation is true or false, made by a body which could include women, and that decision would thereafter be acted upon and a decision made as to whether or not to disfellowship by the elders. Do you understand?
I do understand, and I apologise, Your Honour, for not answering directly. I didn't understand fully what you were saying. The answer, Your Honour, is such a situation would be worthy of us considering and doing research and checking the scriptures. Yes, the possibility of considering that is there.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologise again.
Mr. Jackson, I'd like to refer you to Shepherd the Flock of God, which is tab 120 at page 71, ringtail 72. Now, this is the manual for elders, and it's been applicable since, as I understand it, 2010. Is that right?
This is, yes, that appears to be the case.
And would it be the case that this manual came through the processes of the writing committee?
This manual would have been prepared with the help of the service departments, and the service committee would have prepared this information. And yes, the writing committee wouldn't have needed to read everything and check to see it scripturally applicable.
Yes. And what I'm showing you page 71, but that's in chapter 5, which is headed determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. And it starts out by setting out various wrongdoings, serious ones, including manslaughter, attempted suicide, premier, and so on. So that's the context. But you'll see at paragraph 37, it says, even though a Christian has been accused of wrongdoing serious enough to require judicial action, a judicial committee should not be formed unless the wrongdoing has been established, and the word established is in italics. So my question is, who is it who decides whether the wrongdoing has been established?
So it is my understanding that two others normally would investigate the matter to see if there is some substance to the accusation, having in mind, as you mentioned, this could be ranging from someone getting drunk to someone committing immorality and so on. So those two elders would at least see if there was some basis of the accusation, and they would get back to the body of elders, who then would appoint the judicial committee.
Yes. So then the question is it scripturally necessary that that role is performed by two elders as opposed to, for example, a woman appointed for them?
May I ask, Mr. Stewart, is this the same question that His Honour asked, or is there a difference? Are you just emphasising the point?
Well, I'm trying to understand your answer, Mr. Jackson. So if you can just address yourself to my question. What I've sought to do is to identify a very specific decision in the process. It's the decision as to is the wrongdoing established, and you've said that that's done by two elders who then report back to the body of elders, which then appoints a judicial committee. So I'm asking scripturally, is there room for that decision as to whether the wrongdoing has been established to be anyone other than elders?
Good. I understand your question, Mr. Stewart. Could we take the case of where the